friends, I'm Ellie Eberts, and recently I started making an Edwardian-inspired Sophie Hatter cosplay from Howl's Moving Castle. Howl's Moving Castle is one of my favorite movies of all time, so I am crazy excited to be bringing a historical twist to Sophie's iconic costume. Of course, before I could begin sewing the actual outfit, I had to make some Edwardian undergarments. I started by making a combination. I finished it a few weeks ago. It turned out super duper cute, and you can watch that video up in the iCard above, and I'll also link it in the description below. But now it is time to move on to what might arguably be the most important foundation garment for an Edwardian costume, and that is the S-bend corset. I am really excited to work on this. I have never built like a legitimate corset before. I've made a lot of structured things or things that I could call very loosely a corset, but never one that was actually intended to alter the silhouette of my body. So I am really excited to make this, and I hope you guys are excited to watch my progress. So let's get sewing. I began by purchasing the Ref W corset pattern by Altier Sylph. This pattern was copied from an existing garment, meaning it is an exact copy of a 1905 corset. Being able to use older techniques and patterns to create new garments is just so exciting to me. Along with the digital pattern, she also provides links to tutorials on how to build your corset and a folder full of images of the original corset. The one downside to this pattern is that it is made for a 20-inch waist. I for sure do not have a 20-inch waist, so I needed to scale up the pattern. Altier Sylph provides a tutorial on how to scale up her patterns using the slash and spread method, but I simply printed my pattern at 175%. This method only worked because I also wanted the pattern to be longer than the corset she based it off of. If you don't want your corset to be any longer than the original, you would definitely need to use the slash and spread method. After I had my pattern in hand, I started by making a mock-up. Normally when I create a mock-up, I'm using the cheapest and ugliest fabrics I have. However, the shape-changing properties of corsets rely heavily on the sturdy materials that they are made out of. So I made my mock-up out of duck canvas, my go-to stabilizer. I also added boning channels and steel bones to my mock-up to make sure that I was seeing how the finished garment would really look. Now, I recorded some vlog-style try-on footage, but I got super rambly, and I don't think y'all want to hear 10+ minutes of me talking about the fit of my corset. In the end, I ended up taking the bust inserts in by about 1 inch each and slash and spread the side piece to give more room to the waist and hips. I also decided that in order to get the hip spring I wanted, I needed a hip improver, which I made following a 1905 pattern. Normally, after I've made one mock-up, I would move on to my final garment. But because corsets are so reliant on having the perfect fit, I decided it would be a smart idea to make a second mock-up. Again, I filmed my fitting notes, but I still don't know if you want to hear me mumble for 15 minutes. In the end, I decided I really liked the fit of the second corset and was ready to make my final garment. I started by cutting all my pattern pieces from my baby pink fashion fabric and my duck canvas. Once these pieces were cut, they were basted together at the edges so that each piece was made of 1 layer of fashion fabric and 1 layer of duck canvas. As I cut my pieces, I made sure to keep the markings from my patterns visible, especially the markings for seam allowances and bone casings. Now I can begin sewing my corset. Each of these pattern pieces provided their own challenges. The first piece is the bust insert. This piece has a sharp point at the bottom. In order to keep this point flat, we have to perform a bit of sewing magic. I first stitched down one side of my triangle, ending at the point and keeping my needle in the fabric. Then I used my snips to trim into the corner of the larger pattern piece. This allowed me to rotate the entire piece around and stitch down the other side of the triangle. You have to be very careful not to get too close though, otherwise this seam can totally split. Corsets of the 1900s didn't have linings, and they also didn't have sergers to finish their seams. So they generally finished seams by flat felling them. Today, we primarily use flat-felled seams on jeans, but it's a beautiful method that creates such a clean inside look. This pattern was made to accommodate flat-felled seams, so on each seam, one side of the seam allowance will be smaller than the other. To create these flat-felled seams, I'm simply folding the longer seam allowance over the other, so that the shorter seam allowance is completely enclosed. Then I'm going to stitch this seam allowance into place. These stitches are going to be seen from the right side, so it's important that they are placed evenly away from the seam. I'm using my presser foot to make sure my stitches stay in the right position. Once the seam allowance is stitched into place, I'm creating another row of top stitching right next to the seam. These flat-felled seams ended up being one of my favorite parts of this corset. They are just so beautiful. They also help to add stability to my seams, meaning this corset is not going to fall apart anytime soon, no matter how tight I lace it. I continued this process of attaching and flat felling my seams until I had 2 complete corset halves. Next, I'm going to add grommets. Grommets are metal attachments that create perfect holes for lacing your corset. They come in 2 pieces and have to be hammered onto your garment. Before I dive right into attaching my grommets, I wanted to finish the back edges of my corset halves. I did this by cutting another copy of the back piece of my corset from both my fashion and canvas material. Then I stitched this piece onto the back edge of my corset. After ironing it into place, I added 2 boning channels by top stitching over both pieces. My grommets are going to live in between these channels. Using my fabric marker, I marked a dot for each grommet. Each side of my corset has 20 grommets. This felt like a lot when I was marking them, but having this many is important to pull the corset evenly along its entire length. Now, down to the basement for some hammering. Most starter grommet kits come with this hole puncher and a 2-piece grommet attacher. First, I'm going to punch out the holes for all of my grommets. Then I can place my grommets into these holes. The curved side of the grommet lives on the outside of my corset, and the flat side lives on the inside. Then, using the provided tools, I'm hammering the grommets into place. This turns over the edges of the grommet and locks them into place. Now I'm going to finish the front edges of my corset. The front of this corset is going to close with a busk. A busk is essentially a steel bone that has hooks or pegs attached to it. These hooks and pegs link with each other and close the front of the corset. Having a busk makes it a million times easier for the wearer to get in and out of the corset by themselves. First, I'm inserting the hook side of my busk. After pinning my new lining piece to the corset, I've marked where the hooks of my busk are with my fabric marker. As I stitch this line, I will skip over these marks so there will be holes in the stitches for the hooks to poke through. Now that I've attached the lining piece, I can insert my busk. Following directions from Altier Sylph, I also attached my waist tape to the busk. Waist tape is added to corsets to lessen the wear on the waist seams. Now I can add a line of top stitching to the side of the busk, which will hold it in place. I repeated a similar process for the peg side of my busk. The main difference is that in order to insert the pegs, I had to poke holes through the fashion side of my corset. I simply used sharp scissors to do this, but there is definitely a tool designed for this. Then I top stitched on both sides of this busk piece. Now that the busk is inserted and the waist tape is in place, we can now attach our boning channels. I'm using twill tape to create my channels. Each line of twill tape can hold 2 1/4-inch flat steel bones. Following the chalk markings on my corset, I basted my boning channels into place. As I basted, I tried to keep my stitches as close to the center of my twill tape as possible. And once these were basted into place, I was able to stitch them down. I did this from the right side of my corset using my basting stitches to guide me. Each channel got 3 stitches, 1 on either side and 1 down the middle. With my boning channels completed, I quickly inserted my bones and tried it on. Again, I recorded some rambly vlog footage, but I decided that it might be best for me to summarize. I think this corset is so cute. I really love the fit of it, and the silhouette it's creating is incredible. It was pinching a little bit at the ribs, but honestly, I think that's just because it was laced a little bit too tight. Now, all that's left is a little bit of decoration. I have this beautiful embroidered lace left over from when I made my combination. I'm going to gather this to the top of the corset. I ran a basting stitch along the edge of my lace and then gathered it to fit the top of my corset. I stitched this into place. Next, I'm creating suspenders that will be attached to the bottom of my corset. I've always thought that having suspenders on a corset looks a little weird, but it's period, so we're going with it. I sewed 4 tubes of my fashion material, 2 that were around 20 inches long and 2 that were 16 inches. These tubes were all 1 inch wide. I inside outed the tube and inserted my 1 inch wide elastic. This elastic, when stretched, reaches the same length as the tubes. Next, I'm going to attach my suspender clips. I finished the edges of my tubes with bias tape, then inserted my clip. After that, I folded the edges of the bias tape over and stitched it into place. I really don't think this is a historically accurate method, but at this point in the project, I was ready to take the easy way out. So, after completing all 4 suspenders, I attached them to the hem of my corset. The shorter suspenders live at the front of the corset, and the longer ones live at the side seam. Now, it's time to finish up the top and bottom edges of my corset. I'm finishing my edges with white cotton bias tape. After stitching the short side of the bias tape to my corset, I then folded the bias tape over and hand stitched the other side to the inside of the corset. Finally, I added these adorable little bows to my suspenders, and the corset was finished. Alrighty friends, so here is a look at my finished 1905 Edwardian style S-bend corset. That is a bit of a mouthful. I really love the way this project came out. It was challenging, it was different than anything I've ever really made before, but I think it came out super duper cute. Some of my favorite pieces are, of course, this super beautiful pink material that we chose as our main fabric, as well as this really cute lace that I also used on my combination, so it kind of fits everything together. And of course, I also really like all the flat felled stitching. I think these top stitches look really nice. It makes everything look super clean, and it makes it super sturdy. This corset is not going anywhere. It's not falling apart. It's not gonna bend out of shape. It is like sturdy. So I think it turned out really cute. Here you can see the silhouette. Here we have that straight front and a bit of a S-bend curve in the back, which is really, really cool. I really do like it. I think it's super cute. My least favorite part has got to be these suspenders. They're just like a little weird. I know that they're period, but I don't really like them. But like I said, they're period, so they're staying. Anyway, I'm really excited to be able to build Sophie over this corset and all these other foundational garments. I think it's going to create a really, really cool looking costume. So I hope that you guys will all stick around and watch me build Sophie. So hopefully in the next few weeks, we will have a costume to go over top all of these gorgeous undergarments. Alrighty, well, if you have any questions about this corset building process, please leave them in the comments below. I will do my best to answer them. And until next time, make sure to keep sewing, stay positive, and have fun. I will see you later. Bye!